could ever have got wind of?
I'm not sure, but this is not the case. It really happened in front of our eyes, and the question is what should be done in regard to it in order to avoid it in the future. It's going to be a tough struggle. There will be many tough and painful moments along the way, but I believe that if we will coordinate diplomatic, operational, intelligence, and economic activities that will not let them land at any airport and will isolate automatically any nation that is ready to host terror or support them. By doing this consistently along 6 or 10 years, we will reduce dramatically this challenge to all our way of life.
Your words, Mr. Barak, are very similar to the words used to justify missile defense in the United States, which may have taken another 10 or 15 years. Here we've seen low-tech hijacked by those with evil intent.
Yeah, I believe that it's, first of all, missile defense is also something which is clearly needed as long as there are
stop something like this,
rogue states, and it should be done, and it should be deployed maybe not on national level, but only on trans-regional level to cover exactly the threat from rogue states like Iran, Iraq, or Libya. But in this area, we will suffer. It will not be so easy to go aboard an airplane in the near future, but we have no way but to stand firm facing terror. Otherwise, all our way of life will be threatened. And to stand firm means to isolate from the world every nation that is hosting them and calling every terror thug with the accurate name and be ready with all the pains that come with it to act upon our observations.
What price might democracy have to pay, given what has happened in the last 3 hours in the United States, given what you're experiencing now in Israel, in the center of Jerusalem, from your own citizens now, with the bombing over the weekend?
There is no shortcuts. You know, our civilization is already highly vulnerable. Look at the entrances into the gates of boarding airplanes. It's a situation where it's not easy. Every simple step, crossing borders or going on a plane or on a ship, will become more complicated. But at the same time, it's a time to identify. There are no more than 5 or 6 countries in the world which are directly or indirectly responsible for hosting terror. There are no more than 10 or 15 terror thugs in the world. All the organizations are well known. The MI6 know all the information, the CIA knows, the Mossad knows it, and the same, the Zion Bureau, the band. And it's time for action. Facing such an attack, we cannot but act. And these terror thugs and rogue leaders are highly skillful in identifying the slightest cracks in the will of power or power of will of the leaders of the free world.
But let me press this point about democracy and the price democracy may have to pay, because you know very well that many passengers in the United States have long expected to be able to walk into an airport, get on a domestic aircraft unhindered within about 10 minutes of the plane taking off. Yeah. They expect that as a free country.
And it's a part of the problem that we have in a world which is so turbulent that we won't be able to isolate our advanced way of life from what happens around. And it's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society.
Now, Mr. Barak, you have deep problems, great attention in the Middle East at the moment, but you've used there a war against this kind of terrorism. What can be done? Because the great thing that is talked about by people like you, diplomats, politicians, world leaders, is preventing conflict before it happens. When you talk about a war, how do you take a war or a challenge or a struggle to those who are determined, through 3 or 4 people only today, to hijack 4 planes at least, as we know, hit the Pentagon, hit the World Trade Center, try and hit, we believe, somewhere else? How do you take a war to 4 people?
I spent decades struggling terror, almost, with my 10 fingers, together with a lot of colleagues all around the world. I believe that the world intelligence community, in a concerted effort, can identify within few months the sources of this terror. They can identify the places where they are deployed on Earth. Every such a place is within certain country. The bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of
who else
terror.
do you identify, though? Because we're not saying he's responsible for this necessarily.
No, we don't say that he's necessarily responsible. We know where other terror thugs are living. We know that Ferganskaya Dolina in Central Asia is a major route for drugs, but at the same time major route for terror. And I know that President Putin is highly committed to the struggle against terror, and I feel that he should be part of this international effort. I believe that the MI6 is highly capable. You have proven it along decades. Your own skills in standing firm politically and acting pointedly, operationally against terror. And we should cooperate with
preemptively?
Both preemptive and by diplomatic means, namely rogue states. There are 5 of them: Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea. These kind of states should be treated as rogue states. And the same applies to even to leaders like Arafat. We heard him just recently condemning this. I praise him for this condemnation, but he personally is responsible for many terror events that happened in the last few years. Same happened in some other capitals in the Middle East.
Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel, here in BBC World. Thank you for joining us here in our studio in London. And as Mr. Barak was speaking, we were seeing live pictures there from downtown New York, from Manhattan, where we gather from local hospitals that many hundreds of people have been admitted in chaotic scenes to the hospitals with extensive burns. We gather also that, and here you're seeing live pictures from the White House. You can see there part of the very familiar landmarks around Pennsylvania Avenue and the Mall, one of the presidential helicopters coming in to land in the vicinity of the White House itself. Just to underline, for those of you joining us here on BBC World, for those of you who've not caught up with the horrific news from the United States, at least 4 aircraft have been hijacked. 2 were hijacked and flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center on the southern tip of Manhattan in the heart of Wall Street. All this happened just before 9 o'clock this morning. There are the images of the buildings before both of the World Trade Center buildings collapsed. The first one within about an hour of the United Airlines Boeing 737 flying into it and through it. And there was the second tower crumbling, the steel, the dust, the weight, the fumes, the power cables. It's hard to imagine the horror, particularly for the emergency services already gathered underneath, trying to rescue people, not knowing quite how enormous what was going on top of the building was. We do understand that the mayor of New York City has ordered the evacuation of Manhattan. That was announced a few moments ago.
This is Dawson. I guess you know the North Tower is down.
And just to confirm, we know that United Airlines has confirmed the loss of 1 plane. We know American Airlines said it has lost 2 planes with a total of 164 on board. That's according to news reports. Now, let me make clear, the services were Flight American 11 from Boston to Los Angeles and Flight 77 from Dulles to Los Angeles. The FBI said a total of 4 planes have been hijacked. To their knowledge so far, they closed all American airspace within about half an hour of the first incident. And we know that a 4th plane has crashed about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh in southern Pennsylvania. Reports from the emergency services there say it was a 767. Now, John Lyon is joining me from Washington. John, you've been out on the streets. what is the scene around the White House as we watch these pictures of the emergency services cloaked in dust from the World Trade Center in New York?
Well, perhaps I can take you back. I was first down at Washington National Airport, which is very close to the Pentagon building. I was trying to get a flight from there to New York. Very soon we heard the airport was closed and it was evacuated, and people said that there had been a plane crashed on the Pentagon. The report from there was it was a Boeing 757. The Pentagon building is very close to that airport, so it could have just crashed on its way in. At first, of course, without knowing it was some sort of attack, you might imagine it was a plane on final approach, just not quite making it to the airport. You could see and indeed smell this horrible great pall of black smoke, little bits of debris even floating down on us there. A horrible sight I hope I never have to see again. A lot of people, their airline staff particularly, discussing which flights they might have been, because they, of course, would have known people possibly on those flights, their colleagues and so forth. I even spoke to a couple of people who had been booked on one of the flights which is believed to have crashed and decided just to have a lie-in this morning, which, of course, saved their lives. We were pushed out of the airport, and they even hurried us on even more when they heard reports of another plane on the way to Washington that had been hijacked. Pushed away from the airport, we eventually managed to flag down a little shuttle bus, which took us in towards the District of Columbia. At this stage, even though what was slowly becoming clear, people just hadn't quite grasped the enormity of the disaster. They were still asking, when's my luggage going to arrive? Which hotel can I stay in? Where are the flights being diverted to? And things like that. And indeed, it looked like commuters were still coming past on the road because perhaps they hadn't had their car radios on and hadn't realized what had happened. Then as you go on that road, going into the District of Columbia, going into Washington, you see the Pentagon building on your left. It's a huge, great, sprawling building, quite low-rise, and this pall of smoke is around the back side of the building as you're looking from the Potomac River, from the center of Washington. Still well alight, maybe an hour after that plane must have crashed on it. Going into the center of Washington, for the most part, the road were actually open and working quite normally until you get into the center of the District of Columbia, when there is complete gridlock. All office workers have been sent home from federal offices. Indeed, I try and even to go into a museum to use the telephone, and you're not allowed in. Everything's been shut down here. The city is ground to a complete standstill, except, strangely, the subway system. I'm in an underground station. You may be able to hear the trains still running, perhaps usefully, because it's about the only way to get around here. And so right in the core of this city, perhaps in the epicenter almost of the disaster, a strange air of normality. There's people actually walking in the Mall, the central green swathe in the middle of Washington, and people are walking around. There's still some tourists with their little backpacks and so forth, not quite knowing what to do with themselves.
John, as I'm talking to you, we're looking at video. I can't quite work out where it is. I suspect it's in New York, judging by what you've been saying. But in that ride back from National Airport, Ronald Reagan Airport, how would you say the city is coping with it? Because in the end, they have been deeply worried about terrorism, and they have taken certain measures with bollards and other big preventative devices around the city centre for several years now.
Well, the word certainly seems to be getting round very quickly. The main problem is once everybody gets in their cars in this city, inevitably there is gridlock. Perhaps eventually they're going to have to think of some way of cutting down the number of cars on the road within these disasters. Inevitably, you have single people individually getting into their cars, and the whole place grinds to a halt. We have, incidentally, on the local radio stations here, and I don't know if you've heard at your end yet, reports also that a bomb or a car bomb may have gone off outside the State Department, which is at the far end of the Mall from the Capitol building, quite close to the Potomac River. I haven't heard that confirmed. Obviously, I'm out on the street and can't speak to the police, but that is the word from security sources quoted on the radio here. All those buildings, particularly the State Department, have bollards and barriers so that anybody attempting to car bomb them has to park quite a distance from the building, so the impact of the blast is reduced. So we'll have to wait and see what's happened there, whether that has indeed happened.
John Lyon, our correspondent in central Washington, D.C., speaking to us from a subway station, one of the few things that's now working. And as he was speaking, we were seeing earlier images shortly after the United Airlines plane hit one of the Twin Towers just before about 10 to 9 local time, New York City time, in the height of the rush hour. Both those towers you can see before you now on the screen, believe it or not, for anyone who's just tuning in, have now collapsed following what has really been an unreal 3 hours, both in New York City and in Washington. Let me just, as we look at those images of the two towers before they collapsed, one about an hour after the incident, one about an hour and 40 minutes after the incident, that there are 4 planes which have been hijacked. That's been confirmed by the American authorities. The American Federal Aviation Authority has shut down American airspace and did so shortly afterwards. Canada has also shut its airspace, according to Ottawa. And a 4th plane, after these twin towers were hit by 2 planes, and a 3rd plane was flown directly into the outer perimeter of the Pentagon, which is across the Potomac River from Washington. A 4th aircraft, believed to be a Boeing 767, crashed about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh in South Pennsylvania. Now, I'm giving you information simply as it comes in, without any suggestion of attribution or pointing finger, but just to report that Afghanistan's Taliban ambassador to Pakistan has condemned all the attacks within the last few minutes. These are the pictures of the Pentagon. Let's now go to Boston, to a public security official. 2 planes took off from there and were flown into the World Trade Center. Let's listen to his remarks.
That's outside of the scope of the airport's responsibility. We're leaving it up to the FAA to conduct that activity.
Joe, what is the code Fort Knox? We have reports of employees screaming Fort Knox around the airport at the time that the planes went into the World Trade Center.
I don't know what that means. Doesn't have any connotation here at Logan Airport.
What about planes that are flying in here? Are they being rerouted somewhere else?
Aircraft were flying into Logan Airport. We did take some arrivals, but now since the airport is shut down, these flights will be diverted to Canada.
They're not taking flights either.
Are you screening passengers who were let off their airplanes through the terminal? You said you moved them to another area?
We've moved them to another area, yes.
Where are they now, and are they
They're being directed to seek either public transportation or their own transportation out of the airport.
before they were removed?
This guy's name is Joseph.
Leaving the airport? No.
How long do you anticipate the airport to be closed?
It's indefinite at this time. We'll be meeting with the FAA. We'll be conducting an analysis of our intelligence that we have. We'll make a determination later on this afternoon.
Can you detail some of your security measures?
Pardon me?
Can you provide further details on the security measures?
I can just tell you briefly, we have shut down the security checkpoints. We've moved everyone away from the boarding gate areas. We've increased police presence dramatically. We've requested additional state police be sent to the airport. And we've shut down some construction activities around the airport.
Is another flight from Boston to Los Angeles missing?
I can't confirm or deny that right now.
Is there anything unusual about the boarding procedure of this American flight this morning?
I don't have any reports that would say same.
Are you investigating breaches of security? How are you getting to the bottom of this hijacking?
I can tell you we have an ongoing investigation right now. Just an initial investigation. It's being conducted with Massport, Massachusetts State Police, and the FBI.
What do you know about United Airlines Flight 175, which is unaccounted for right now and came out of Boston?
I don't have any, I can't confirm or anything or deny anything on that particular flight. No, they have not.
Joe, did Flight 11 leave on time? Were there any delays? And was there any conversation between the pilot and the tower that seemed unusual?
Flight number 11 left at 7:59. I believe it was on time, and everything went as scheduled when it left Logan Airport.
How many people were on board?
I don't have a passenger count right now.
Are you aware of any communications from the pilot?
No, I'm not.
Would its flight path to L.A. normally have taken it south or towards New York, southwest?
I can't answer that. I don't have any information on that flight path.
When did the tower here detect that there was something wrong?
Again, I don't have that specific information.
Where was the plane before it was in Boston?
I don't know.
You know what time this United flight left?
I have no information on the United flight right now.
How unusual would it be for a plane to fly toward New York when you're heading to Los Angeles?
Again, I'm not familiar with the particular flight patterns they may have filed.
Was it a non-stop flight to Los Angeles?
I believe it was.
At what time, sir, were the flights stopped at Logan? You know?
What?
At what time?
What time was the airport shut down?
I believe we shut the airport down to arriving flights somewhere around 9:15, and departing flights shortly after that.
And what happened to the flights that were in the air? Where were they
They were
diverted
diverted to other airports.
How long will the airport be shut? How long will it?
Again, we're going to assess all the measures that we've taken. We want to, obviously, the safety and security of anyone who works here at the airport, any of our passengers, is a top priority.
Do you have a lot of baggage that hasn't been claimed, or you allow people to claim that baggage?
That's an airline decision, yes.
Do you know where that plane came from, sir? Do you know where the plane came from?
I do not.
Joe, can you explain what's going to be going
in the terminal, in American Airlines?
James Lawless, a public security official
Well,
at
security-
Boston's Logan Airport, from which
It's a collaborative effort.
two of the aircraft involved in the horrendous events of the last 3 hours took off. Now, let me just clarify, because it is getting quite difficult to work out which plane has been involved in which incident. We can confirm that American Airlines have publicly said that they have lost 2 aircraft. One was Flight 11, which was flying from that airport, Logan, to Los Angeles. It had 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots on. That was a Boeing 767. Also, Flight 77, American Flight 77, a Boeing 757, slightly smaller aircraft, which was Washington to Los Angeles with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, and, of course, 2 pilots. One of those aircraft was flown directly into the World Trade Center, the devastation of which you can now see. A second United aircraft, also we believe flying out of Boston, was also flown directly into one of the towers. There, I have to tell you, that is reality in New York 3 hours ago. Both those towers have now collapsed. And just to continue with what's happened to a 4th aircraft, which was a 747, a jumbo, the largest of the 4 aircraft, according to local emergency officials in western Pennsylvania. But that's now been corrected to a 767, which is slightly smaller. United Airlines have confirmed that one of its flights did crash in southern Pennsylvania in Somerset County. But that is, we believe, the United Airlines plane, one of them hijacked out of Boston, flying into the World Trade Center just before 9 o'clock in the morning in New York City. And again, to confirm, the World Trade Center has now collapsed. The most dreadful scenes in southern Manhattan. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, has ordered the evacuation of southern Manhattan because of the extraordinary humanitarian challenge down there, quite apart from the business challenge and everything else. Wall Street, of course, is shut down. But in fact, much of this, the dust, the fire, the devastation has shut it down by default. Wall Street is under the World Trade Center, just to the north of it. And in Washington, D.C., where one of the aircraft flew into the perimeter of the Pentagon, there was fire and devastation in one part of the Pentagon, and also there has been a car bomb outside the State Department. I'm joined now by counterterrorism specialist Mike Bluestone from the Barclays Security Bureau. Well, Mike, I was joined a short time ago by President Clinton's former advisor on counterterrorism, Stephen Simon, and he actually said this is really worse than the doomsday scenario that he, in the White House and the National Security Council, had been planning for.
Absolutely. This is an unprecedented act of terror on a major scale, which has obviously taken long-term planning and intelligence, a well-coordinated strike at the very economic heart of the Western world, at the World Trade Center.
When you talk about the economic heart, there we are watching those images of the 2 towers before they collapsed. But what we're talking about there is not just this building. We're talking about businesses inside it,
yes.
Telecommunications,
yes.
all the telecommunications
yes.
sitting
yes.
on top of that.
This demonstrates the vulnerability of civilian infrastructures against well-planned acts of terrorism. We hear a lot spoken about defensive systems against ballistic missiles and that type of warfare. But this type of thing really shows that in planning the contingency plans and preventative measures to protect civilian infrastructures, you've got to go a long way to come up with a plan that will deal with this type of attack.
Now, Mike, your job is counter-terrorism. You advise people how to stop something like this.
Yeah.
This must be your worst nightmare, because in the end, I mean, I don't know the figures, neither do you, but it could be literally 1 or 2 men on each of those 4 planes who hijacked it and have caused this.
Indeed.
That is not an army.
Indeed.
It's not building missiles.
Indeed.
How do you track people like that?
Indeed. Well, it doesn't need an army to carry out an act of terror, which has been proven time and time again. But the key to preventing terrorism is through good intelligence. Of course, physical security measures have a major role to play, whether it be through scanners, visual profiling and that type of thing at airports. But at the end of the day, it's intelligence that will lead us to the perpetrators. There have been reports coming out of the Middle East about acts like this being planned, and I know that these have been taken seriously by security agencies. Clearly, in this case, the terrorists have the upper hand.
Well, we know that these kind of things have been planned in the past. Sitting in that chair half an hour ago, we were told about an incident that was foiled in 1996 where one Arab terrorist group, and I'm not going to put a name on it, had coordinated attacks on 12 jumbos over the Pacific, and they stopped it. They foiled it just in time. They did get the intelligence then.
Yes, yes. I think what we need to think about now, though, is how we move forward and pick up the pieces, because we've got to resume trade, we've got to resume international flights and internal flights. We have to show the perpetrators, no matter how dastardly this type of act is, that democracies and decent people won't be intimidated and that normal life must carry on. And I think now, when literally the dust has settled, within the coming 24 and 48 hours, we need to give all our energy into determining how we can pick up the pieces and move forward and give some kind of confidence back to the economic and civilian communities that they're not going to be at risk like this on an ongoing basis.
But let's be realistic. You can say that kind of thing. Here we've had the heart of Manhattan devastated. It'll look how long look what's happened in Oklahoma City. That one building there, and look how long it's taken to normalize life around there with the scars and so on. There you've got vast numbers of people who go into work in the financial heart of the world. How do they pick up their pieces? They won't even have a desk to go to or an office to go to, a file of a server to actually provide the business for them.
I don't want to get into sort of the micro detail of things like contingency planning, but in most situations there will be plans where what we call hot and cold sites are available for people to go and work in. But I think the scale of this disaster just overshadows even the practicalities of coming to terms with that. And so I think we're going to need a couple of days for everyone to sort of calm down and take a deep breath and say, let's put those contingency plans into play, move into those alternative sites, because we have to try and get back to normal as quickly as possible. It's a major challenge, but we have to try.
But we've not just had this. We've had the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. We had the USS Cole almost a year ago, October the 12th last year. We then had in 1998 Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. There really is a limit to what you can do to protect anything.
Of course there is. Of course there is. There's no such thing as 100% security and never will be. But what we need to do is to try and identify exactly who the perpetrators are. That's not going to be a quick process either. I don't think we can attach too much importance to the claims by the various groups that claims have perpetrated this act. There'll be claims and denials and counter-denials. It's going to take some time before we can actually identify who carried this out and what in fact their aims are, because what political benefits is anyone going to get out of this?
But who do you target? In the end, the American attack on the pharmaceutical factory in Khartoum achieved nothing.
I don't think that there can be that kind of retaliation in the light of the scale of this. It's got to be a much cooler, longer-term planned response until all the facts are known. I think a knee-jerk response just won't achieve anything.
Well, Mike Bluestone, counterterrorism expert, thank you very much indeed. For the moment, we're watching pictures, I think recorded pictures from southern Manhattan of the events which began just over 3 hours ago. There we have one of the towers of the World Trade Center falling, collapsing, disintegrating. Dust, all of what it took years to build, coming down in seconds, following the building being hit by 2 hijacked aircraft. That is the scene in the south of Manhattan in New York City. There has been a series of terrorist attacks against major buildings